does the Michigan State commitment occur within all of this, within this time?
So it hadn't happened yet. So it was still had some trips, I think, planned that spring. Yeah, and in fact, I hadn't gone to Michigan State even until after that time of the year. So, you know, and, you know, it's always tough, right? You look at different schools. But as you mentioned before, you know, sitting here with this decision of where to go and what to do, and I get a call from Alec Mull. And it was great. It was like kind of the first time, you know, we were suits off and just talking as a couple of guys. And, you know, at the time, Richard Bader was the coach, was recruiting, of course, the two of us and John Moore, Okamus, breaststroker. And, you know, Al was just like, hey, he's struggling with the same decision I am, but he's like, hey, I'd really like to go to school here. And I know you're looking at it too. But, you know, if we do this together, like we'd have a really solid recruiting class and Johnny come in there. You know, what do you think about that? And so, you know, obviously thought about it and sounded like a good plan. And yeah, so made that commitment, you know, within a couple of weeks, I think.
I want to say this in the most respectful way that I can moving through here. You know, I just think, simply put, that's probably a better recruiting class than Michigan State's putting together today. You know, yeah. For a swimmer that might be listening to this right now, you know, without insulting, in no way am I meaning to insult Michigan State's program right now. It's just a testament to that era and that group of guys, the guys that you're going through. Alec is the top middle distance freestyler in the state of Michigan. They get the best IMer and butterflyer in the state of Michigan and you, but then you add on other names like they come in this time frame, like Jon Cohen, who's one of the most established distance freestylers ever in the state, you know, and just one of the most elite age group distance freestylers. And then in addition, let's throw in John Moore, multiple time state champion in the 100 breaststroke as well. So like, it's not just one or two gets. In the late 80s and early 90s, the Spartans grabbed really some of the best Michigan talent there is. And you guys all, it sounds like, are kind of communicating with each other and coming together to kind of form that. That was a cool time for Michigan State swimming.
Oh, exactly. I mean, that was real exciting. Like, you know, talk to Al and know that he and John were, you know, thinking the same thing. And of course, I knew Jon Cohen was up there. Yeah, it just it was a great vision for, you know, what could go do. Yeah, and to your point, you know, today that would be a harder pull to do that. Yeah.
Certainly to get 4 or 5 guys, you know, like of that caliber and that level of accomplishment. So if I can, to kind of ask you a couple of big picture questions that kind of like look back at a couple of points in your life. If I asked you to look back at the first 18 years, everything that happened kind of as a junior swimmer, and that could be as a club swimmer or in the high school ranks, what are you most proud of?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, let's see. You know, it's kind of easy to maybe go to you know, an event like some races. You know, I mean, honestly, I would say just the commitment, like the training. You know, as an adult looking back, and having kids of my own, and who are swimmers, you know, I value that. And when I look at the amount of training that was done and the commitment to something, like I think swimmers get that, you know, pretty clearly. would say that that in itself is probably the thing that I'm most proud of. Yeah, if it was, if it was an accomplishment, that senior year state meet was a good one.
Absolutely. Now, if I asked you to expand that more broadly to the totality of your swimming career, which would include, all the way through to the end at Michigan State, is it still a similar answer, or does it broaden out a little bit with some college experience?
It's the same. Like the one thing for me I always wanted to get to was go to Olympic trials, right? And for college, I continue to, get incrementally faster. Just lost that, huge progressive jumps in that. But overall, I had a great experience there. I did, and I swam for a couple of years after I graduated. I came down here to Austin, right? So for me, just to end my career at that Olympic trials in '96 was kind of the nice landing spot for me, and just proud of seeing it through to that end, and walking away from the sport with that little box checked. Felt good.
That's a great box to check. Do you have a good Eddie Reese story for me?
He's incredible. Like, he had a lot of stories. What kind of guy, does that? So I came down one summer, I think between my junior and senior years, down here just to train. And when I graduated, he invited me down to, train with his team for that year and a half. He's great, and I still see him around. His grandkids are the same age as mine. They live in the same neighborhood, so we go to meets and bump into each other. But there's any stories you've heard, they're all true. I don't know what kind of magic he has, but it's the real deal.
Clay Youngquist has promised me that at some point we'll just do an entire conversation just on Eddie in Texas, but I told him I have a few high school conversations I gotta get through before I can give him that level of time. But no, Christy Young, told me about his visit down there, and I think it was all he could do to fend Eddie off and go to Michigan, even though he had his mindset on it. It's just the pull and the power of Eddie was really strong.
And that's exactly where I was headed too. It's a neat place.
Okay, so one thing I held back, and I have to ask you about it. I hear there's an injury on a recruiting visit that I need to hear about. Now, I thought that Christy Young's injury on his Texas recruiting trip was gonna take the cake. So apparently at Texas, and with your time down there, you would know a lot more about this. There's a jump off a cliff or something that all the incoming recruits take and or freshmen do. And DeYoung did this and really significantly injured his shoulder right before his senior year state meet or right before the senior year. And he missed training his entire senior year. And I asked him, did Urbanchek, did he go, what did he have to say to Reese? And he said that Jon, you had a joke that he was going to send the bill to Eddie to take care of that. So I heard that story and I couldn't believe it. And then just yesterday, I had another swimmer tell me a story that they had a stress fracture in their back, and they went on their recruiting trip, and they had not been allowed to be in the water for months. And they got to their recruiting trip at Texas and were convinced to do a 25-yard sprint race with other recruits, having not swum for months with a back stress fracture. So I've already had my eyes open during this series about some of the things that kids are willing to do on their recruiting trips and the things that can happen. But I don't want to make a joke about it because obviously it wasn't a joking matter, but you I hear that something serious happened to you on one of your trips.
Yeah. So on my trip to Michigan State, one morning,
Alex says, I don't know how this guy ended up at Michigan State after this happened. So I'm so ready to hear this story.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I went to Michigan, I went to Texas, I come into Michigan State. At some point we decide, the team, we're like, we're gonna go play basketball. So we go like the IM West, we're gonna just play game or whatever, like 4-on-4 or something like that. And yeah, we're just messing around. And there's a couple other recruits there. The people like destroys the joints, and I just made a weird move and like dislocated my knee. Like my kneecap just kind of slipped over and it fractured, like kind of cracking. So I went down and as in the future as a host of recruits, I can't even imagine how these guys felt. And I was like, and they're like, oh, you're okay, you can get up and walk. And I was like, no, there's no way, like this is pretty bad. So I get taken over to the medical site over there on campus, and so that was it. Like I ended up leaving and had surgery a couple of days later to kind of put that back together. And that was one, so the one thing it did was, instantly, like, you go down and the first thing in my mind is, can I swim? Am I gonna be able to swim? Can I do breaststroke anymore? Like, it just kind of shattered the whole worldview I have as a swimmer with this kind of direction. And yeah, it was a bummer. So I get it repaired, and it's I'm in a cast for like 7 weeks or something from my hip to my ankle, and that was it. So that's the kind of the condition I was in and making this where I wanted to go. And I called Eddie and John, like, hey, this happened, does it change anything in terms of, and they were like, no, you're gonna be fine. But personally, I was like, if I wasn't swimming, where would I want to be? And so that kind of weighed into the decision, right? And family and friends nearby, and so that kind of helped bring me there. And then like a year later, it was always aggravating. So I had this kind of condition. My knee was always kind of difficult to live with as an athlete. After my freshman year, I had some more work done on it, try to get it kind of back where it was. But it's just the way it goes. And then recently I had one more time going to get it cleaned up, just because I still try to stay active and stuff. And it's great now. Like, I think my surgeon was like, hey, it looks, whatever they were doing in there looked like a Civil War surgeon had been in there, like just the technology and what they can do. But yeah, that had to be one of the worst recruiting trip mistakes, if you will. But it all works out.